His wife laughed at him in front of 140,000 people, not behind his back, not in a whispered conversation with her friends, on camera, live. With the comments section moving so fast the words became a blur, and somewhere in that blur a single message that would cost her everything she had ever built. He was the quiet man in the next room. The one who coded the website before the company had a name. The one who signed the lease when she didn't have the credit. The one who put $47,000 of his own money into a dream she would spend the next 7 years telling the world was entirely hers. He never corrected her. He never complained. He simply kept a folder in a fireproof box, waited for the day someone finally asked the right question. What his wife didn't know was that she had never owned what she thought she owned, and the man she dismissed on camera in front of the world was the only signature standing between her and everything she wanted. So what happens when the man you laughed at turns out to be the one your entire empire was built on? If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we are just getting started. And if this story hits different, drop a like before you leave. Now tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly where this story is landing. Now let me take you all the way back to a Friday evening in Atlanta. Because before we get to the Monday morning that changed everything, you need to understand exactly what kind of man was sitting in that next room and exactly what kind of woman decided he was worth laughing at. The house on Briarcliff Road was quiet that Friday evening, the way it always was when Natasha was working. Darius sat at the desk in the back office, the one they called the study, but was really just the room where things got done without an audience. His monitors cast a pale blue light across his face. 3 windows open, network diagnostic tool, a vendor portal he had been rebuilding from scratch, and a terminal running a routine he had written himself because the off-the-shelf solution was too slow, and he had never been willing to tolerate slow. A glass of water sat at his elbow, half empty. Gospel radio played low from a small speaker on the shelf, the same station his grandmother used to keep on while she worked. He was not thinking about Natasha. He was thinking about the packet loss in the warehouse routing system he had been untangling for the better part of 2 hours. Down the hall, the studio was alive. Natasha had converted the 3rd bedroom 18 months ago, ring lights, a backdrop the color of warm cream, a shelf arranged with Bella Terra products in ascending order of price point. She knew how to build a frame. She knew what the camera wanted. When she went live, she became something slightly larger than herself, her voice finding a register that was warm and conspiratorial at the same time, like she was letting every viewer in on something private. Tonight, she had 140,000 of them. Darius could hear her through the wall. Not the words, just the cadence. That particular rhythm she used when she was performing intimacy for strangers. He had learned the difference years ago. He picked up his phone to check the routing update on the warehouse system. The Bella Terra live stream was already open in a separate app, a habit he had developed, not out of affection, but out of professional reflex. He still managed the back end of everything Natasha touched publicly. It was easier to monitor than to explain what happened when something broke during a live event. The chat was moving fast, heart emojis, fire emojis, women tagging their friends. He scrolled without really reading. On screen, Natasha was mid-sentence, her head tilted in that way she had that made questions feel like invitations. Then the question appeared in the chat, typed by a user with a pink butterfly avatar. What does your husband do for Bella Terra, though? Like, does he help with the business? He saw Natasha's expression shift on the small screen. It was not a pause, it was a performance of a pause, the kind designed to signal that what came next was candid, unfiltered, real. Then she laughed. It was a bright, easy laugh, the kind that invited everyone else to laugh with her, and most of them did. "Babe is very supportive," she said, drawing out the word supportive in a way that drained it of all its meaning. "He is a great husband, but entrepreneurial?" She shook her head, still smiling. "Honey, he does not have a single entrepreneurial bone in his body." In the background, just over Natasha's right shoulder, Trish Coleman leaned back in her chair and nodded with the slow satisfaction of someone confirming a thing they had always believed. The comments moved like water breaking through a dam. Laughing emojis, crying laughing emojis, a string of responses that said things like, "Girl same, and he lets you cook though, and support is enough, sis." The clip would be screen recorded and posted to 3 separate accounts within 4 minutes. By midnight, it would have 60,000 views on its own. Darius did not move. He sat with the phone in his hand and watched the comment count climb. He watched Natasha move on seamlessly to the next topic, something about the new vitamin C serum, her voice settling back into its warm, professional groove, as though nothing had happened, as though she hadn't just told 140,000 people that the man who built the thing she was selling had nothing to do with it. He watched the chat scroll, and there, moving fast between the laughing faces and the fire emojis, a comment appeared and disappeared so quickly that most people would have missed it entirely. The screen name was GS1 Law ATL. The message read, "Half that company has the wrong name on it, just saying." It was gone in 2 seconds, buried under a wave of responses about the serum's price point. Darius read it once. He set the phone down on the desk, face down, with the same deliberate care he used when he set down anything he intended to come back to. He did not react. He did not stand up. He did not walk down the hall. He sat in the blue light of his monitors for a long moment, the gospel radio running soft behind him, and he thought about a fireproof box on the shelf in the back of the closet. He thought about a folder inside that box. He thought about a document inside that folder, 12 pages, signed at the bottom of page 1 in his own handwriting 7 years ago in a credit union conference room in Decatur. Then Darius Okafor Bell closed his laptop, picked up his phone, and dialed a number he had not called in 2 years. It rang twice. Raymond O.C. answered on the third. To understand why that phone call mattered, you have to go back 7 years. You have to go back to a 2-bedroom apartment off Campbellton Road in southwest Atlanta, where a 29-year-old network engineer named Darius Okafor Bell kept a legal pad on his kitchen table and wrote down everything he spent. His grandmother had taught him that, Miss Celestine Okafor, who had raised him in a brick house in Adamsville after his mother moved to Charlotte and his father moved on entirely. She kept a ledger for the household, the way some women keep a Bible, close, annotated, and consulted daily. She told Darius that a man who could not account for where his money went could not be trusted with where it was going. He had carried that lesson the way he carried everything she gave him, quietly, without fanfare, and for the rest of his life. He was methodical by nature and an engineer by training. He did not make decisions out of excitement. He made them out of calculation. Natasha was the excitement. She had come into his life the way certain people do. Suddenly, completely, with a force of personality that made everything around her seem slightly less vivid by comparison. She was beautiful and magnetic and possessed of an absolute certainty about her own vision that Darius, who dealt in problems and solutions, found genuinely extraordinary. She had an idea for a skincare line built around natural ingredients sourced from West African botanicals. She had mood boards and a name, Bella Terra, and a passion for the brand that was, at that point, the entirety of the business plan. Darius was the business plan. He was the one who sat down with the legal pad and worked out what it would actually cost. He calculated the LLC filing fees, the registered agent service, the warehouse lease in College Park for the initial inventory, the web development, the first production run, the packaging, the shipping infrastructure. He added it up 3 times the way his grandmother taught him to add up anything that mattered. $47,000. He had saved $52,000 over 6 years of night shifts and deferred pleasures, kept in a credit union account in Decatur that he had opened at 23 because Miss Celestine trusted credit unions and Darius trusted Miss Celestine. He transferred $47,000 into a new joint business account and kept $5 in reserve because he was not a man who spent his last dollar on anything. He filed the LLC himself. He negotiated the warehouse lease himself, shaving $400 a month off the asking rate by reading the Commercial Property Code closely enough to cite a clause the landlord had not expected him to know. He built the website over 3 weekends, clean and fast and structured for search engine indexing from the first day it went live. He set up the inventory management system, the vendor portal, the fulfillment workflow. Natasha made the products beautiful. She wrote the copy. She took the photographs. She understood what women wanted to feel when they held a jar of Bellaterra brightening serum, and she built that feeling into every word on the label. That was real. That was genuine. Darius never disputed it, but before any of that could exist, someone had to build the foundation. Before they launched, Darius sat Natasha down at the kitchen table with the legal pad and the operating agreement he had drafted with Raymond Ossie's guidance. It was 12 pages. The essential provision was on page 1, 50% equity to Natasha Bell, 50% to Darius Okafor Bell, with reinvestment clauses that protected both parties from dilution in future funding rounds without mutual written consent. Natasha signed it the way she signed most paperwork, quickly, at the bottom, without reading the middle. She was already thinking about the launch, about the Instagram content calendar, about the influencer seeding strategy she had mapped out in her head. Darius filed the agreement in a manila folder, labeled it in his precise block handwriting, and placed it inside a fireproof document box on the closet shelf. Then he went back to work. That was his way. The work was the point. The credit was a secondary matter that he assumed would sort itself out over time, the way most things did when the foundation was solid. He was wrong about that, but he would not know it for years. The first sign came 6 months after launch in a local Atlanta lifestyle blog that ran a feature on Natasha under the headline Young Entrepreneur Turns Kitchen, Formula into Beauty Brand. The article was warm and detailed. It named Natasha as the founder. It mentioned her background, her inspiration, her vision. It mentioned Trish Coleman, who had come on as a friend and early advisor, as a key part of the team. It did not mention Darius. He read it on his lunch break, sitting in his car in the parking garage of the office building where he worked his day job. He read it twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back inside. He told himself it was an oversight. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself that Natasha knew what he had contributed, and that was enough. Trish had arrived 6 months after launch, swept in on the current of Natasha's enthusiasm, and she had a talent for making herself indispensable. She had a background in retail operations, a sharp eye for brand positioning, and an absolute dedication to Natasha's vision that looked, from the outside, like friendship. From the inside, it functioned more like alliance. Trish understood, in the way that certain people understand these things instinctively, that her position depended entirely on Natasha's primacy. She reinforced it at every turn. She never corrected an interviewer who left Darius's name out. She never volunteered his contributions in a room. Darius watched all of this from the quiet room that was his natural habitat. He said nothing. He went back to work. And the folder stayed in the fireproof box, waiting with the patience of a thing that knows it will eventually be needed. The years that followed would teach him exactly how much that folder was worth. The offices of Ossie and Associates sat on the 14th floor of a glass building on Peachtree Road in Buckhead, the kind of address that communicated seriousness without announcing it. Darius had been here twice before. Once, when Raymond drafted the original operating agreement, and once 3 years later for a routine will update after Miss Celestine passed. He had not needed a lawyer in the years between. He had not needed one because he had been careful, and careful men rarely need rescuing. He arrived at 9 in the morning, pressed and unhurried, the way he arrived everywhere. Raymond Dosset Sr. met him at the door to the conference room personally, which told Darius that the phone call Friday night had communicated more than he intended. Raymond was 54 years old, silver at the temples, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent 3 decades in rooms where other people were panicking. He shook Darius's hand once, firmly, and closed the door behind them. The first thing Raymond did was slide a printout across the table. It was a screenshot of the Instagram live chat. The screen name, GS1 Law ATL, was circled in red ink. Raymond said that was his son. Marcus Jr., 27, junior associate, third desk on the left. The boy had been watching the live event on his phone at home Friday night because his girlfriend followed Bella Terra. He recognized the company name from a client file his father had asked him to cross-reference months earlier during a routine audit of dormant agreements. He sent the screenshot to Raymond with a single line of text. "Dad, I think you need to look at this." Raymond had looked. Then he reached into the folder on the table and placed the original operating agreement in front of Darius. 12 pages, clean and unaltered, exactly as Darius had last seen it 7 years ago in a credit union conference room in Decatur. His own signature sat at the bottom of page 1, next to Natasha's, both of them in blue ink. Raymond walked him through it with the precision of a man who had already done this work before the meeting started. The equity split was 50-50. That much Darius knew. What he had half forgotten, what the years of invisibility had allowed to drift to the back of his mind like something stored and not retrieved, were the reinvestment clauses on pages 4 and 5. Darius had insisted on them at Raymond's suggestion, back when they were small enough that dilution was a real threat. The clauses stated plainly that neither party's equity percentage could be reduced through future funding rounds without the written consent of both parties. Not one of the 3 funding rounds Natasha had run in the past 4 years had included Darius's written consent. Not one of them had included his knowledge. His stake had never moved. It was still 50%. Raymond then placed a second document on the table. It was a preliminary valuation summary prepared by Luminos Group's acquisitions team, obtained through a contact Raymond declined to name. The number at the top of the page was $18 million. That was the current preliminary valuation of Bella Terra Skincare, pending acquisition close. Darius looked at the number. He did the math the way his grandmother had taught him. Twice, in his head, then once more, to be certain. His stake was worth $9.1 million. Raymond let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. Then he explained the mechanism that made all of it move. An acquisition of this scale required a complete review of the target company's founding documents. Luminos's legal team would pull the original operating agreement during standard due diligence. It was not optional. It was not a matter of if. When they pulled it, they would find 2 signatures on page 1 and a company that had been conducting business. Raising capital, entering contracts, negotiating retail partnerships, as though one of those signatories did not exist. They would find 3 funding rounds that legally required Darius's written consent and never received it. They would find, in short, that no acquisition could execute without his signature. Without Darius Okafor Bell, there was no deal. Raymond said it plainly, without drama, the way a doctor states a diagnosis. He said it, and then he was quiet, and the silence in the room was thick with the weight of 7 years being reorganized into their correct order. Darius thought about Natasha on that live stream, the easy tilt of her head, the practiced laugh. He thought about the award ceremony 3 years ago where she had thanked her team, her community, her vision, and left him in the audience with a glass of water and a program he still had somewhere because he never threw things away. He thought about every vendor call he had taken, every system he had rebuilt at 2 in the morning, every crisis he had quietly resolved before it became visible. He thought about how every dollar she had ever raised, every contract she had ever signed, every press moment she had ever enjoyed, had been built on a foundation that had his name on it. She just had not told anyone. Raymond folded his hands on the table and asked what Darius wanted to do. Darius looked at the operating agreement for a long moment. Then he looked up. He said he wanted to think about it for exactly 24 hours. Raymond nodded. He had expected nothing less. He uses those 24 hours to build something precise. He came back to Raymond's office on Tuesday morning with a legal pad and a plan already written on it. Not notes, not questions. A plan. 2 phases, 6 components, sequenced in the order they needed to execute, with contingencies noted in the margin in his precise block handwriting. Raymond looked at it for a long moment, then looked up at Darius with the expression of a man who had underestimated the person across from him and was quietly revising his assessment. Darius set the legal pad on the table and walked him through it without preamble. Phase 1 was silence, total, complete, and unconditional. Darius would sign nothing. He would contact no one at Luminos, no one at Bellaterra, no one connected to the acquisition in any professional capacity. He would not signal, hint, imply, or suggest that he was aware of his equity position or of the acquisition talks. He would go home that night and every night after and behave like a man who had no idea his name was on anything important. He would be, to all appearances, exactly what Natasha had always told the world he was. Supportive background, no entrepreneurial bones, nothing to see here. Raymond asked how long he intended to hold that position. Darius said until Luminos's legal team did what legal teams always do during acquisition due diligence. They would pull the founding documents, they would find the operating agreement, they would find the signature on page 1 and the reinvestment clauses on pages 4 and 5, and they would stop everything until they understood what they were looking at. That moment was not a risk, it was a certainty. Darius was an engineer. He did not build plans around possibilities. He built them around the behavior of systems under known conditions, and the behavior of acquisition legal teams under these conditions was as predictable as gravity. When Luminos halted and reached out, Raymond would be the point of contact. That was his role in Phase 1, available, professional, and invisible until called. He would not initiate, he would not probe, he would simply be reachable when the call came, which it would. Phase 2 began the moment Luminos made contact. This was where the plan became precise in the way that only an engineer's plan can be, not just in what it sought to achieve, but in the exact mechanism by which it would achieve it. Raymond's negotiating position would not be limited to equity. The equity was the floor, not the ceiling. What Luminos actually needed was not just Darius's signature on a closing document. What they needed was his knowledge, 7 years of vendor relationships, system architecture, fulfillment infrastructure, and operational logic that existed nowhere in any written Bellaterra document, because Natasha had never thought to document what Darius did. She had never thought to document it because she had never believed it mattered. It mattered. Raymond would negotiate 2 things simultaneously: full fair market value for the equity stake and a formal VP of operations role for Bellaterra's integration into the Luminos portfolio. The role was not optional. The role was the point, because the role came with an org chart, and on that org chart, Natasha Bell Okafor's title of brand director would sit inside a division that reported directly to Darius. He would become, in the most formal and unambiguous professional sense, the person she answered to. Raymond asked about the timeline for the VP role. Darius said the start date needed to be the Monday after acquisition close. His first official act in that role would be a full operational review of all Bellaterra departments. He would walk into that building on that Monday morning as the VP of operations and conduct that review with the Luminos integration team already in place, org charts already printed, hierarchy already established. He would need to be in that building before Natasha arrived. Raymond looked at the legal pad again. Then he picked up his pen and made one addition in the margin, which was a note to himself about the procedural mechanism for Phase 1's initiation. There was a way, he explained, to accelerate Luminos's timeline without Darius ever making direct contact. A procedural note sent from a law firm, any law firm, not necessarily his, to Luminos's legal team flagging that the target company's founding documents required review before close. Anonymous, standard, the kind of note that gets sent in complex acquisitions when a party wants to ensure due diligence is thorough without revealing their hand. He said he knew a colleague who could send it under a general practice letterhead. Darius said that would be fine. Raymond sent it that afternoon. No name, no firm identity, just a procedural flag, 4 sentences, delivered to Luminos's legal department through a contact 3 degrees removed from either of them. The gear had been set in motion. That evening, Darius drove home on 285 in the early dark, the city lights spreading out to the left and right like something that had always been his and never announced it. He made tilapia and rice because it was Tuesday, and that was what he made on Tuesdays. He set the table the way he always did. He sat across from Natasha while she scrolled through her phone and talked about the acquisition timeline, her voice bright with the particular energy of someone who believed they were very close to something large. She said the Luminos deal was basically done, probably closes within the month. Darius said that was good to hear. He passed her the bread and went back to his plate. It would not close within the month. The first domino fell on a Wednesday. Luminos Group's legal team had been working through the Bella Terra due diligence package for 6 days when they reached the founding documents. They pulled the original operating agreement at 9 in the morning. By 9:45, the acquisition was on hold. Carol Adeyemi called Raymond directly. She was professional and precise, as Darius had predicted she would be. She said there appeared to be a structural issue with the target company's ownership documentation, and that Luminos could not proceed until the matter was resolved. She asked if Raymond represented the other signatory on the agreement. Raymond confirmed that he did. Carol said she would be in touch. She did not sound surprised. She sounded like a woman who had seen this before and knew exactly what it meant. Natasha found out 2 hours later from her own outside counsel. The call shattered her morning like a stone through glass. Her attorney said only that a complication had emerged in the due diligence review and that the acquisition timeline was paused pending clarification. He did not know what the complication was. He had not been given specifics. He told her not to panic. Natasha panicked. She called Trish first. Trish said she would make calls. She called her investor contact at Meridian Venture Partners next, the boutique VC firm that had committed $2.1 million pending acquisition close. The contact did not answer. His assistant called back 40 minutes later to say that Mr. Holloway would be in touch at his earliest convenience. He was in touch the following morning. The call lasted 4 minutes. Holloway's voice was flat and impersonal, like someone reading from a document. He said Meridian was withdrawing its term sheet pending resolution of the ownership question. He said this was standard protocol. He said they wished Natasha well. He hung up. $2.1 million, gone before she had held it. Natasha called Trish again. This time Trish answered differently. Her voice had a new quality to it. Careful, measured, the sound of someone who had already spoken to a lawyer. She said she needed to protect herself. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped they could work through it. She did not say what she had already done. What Trish had already done was retain a corporate attorney named Bernard Achebe and hand him every internal communication she had stored on her personal devices over the previous 18 months. There were emails, there were text threads, there were screenshots of a conversation between Natasha and Trish from 14 months ago. During the first funding round, in which Natasha had written in plain text that the original operating agreement was complicated and that it was better for everyone if it stayed in a drawer. Trish had kept every message. She had kept them because she was the kind of person who kept things, which was the same quality that had made her useful to Natasha and was now making her devastating. Bernard Achebe submitted those communications to Luminos's legal team on a Friday afternoon. The legal term for what Natasha had done was material omission. She had known about Darius's equity position and had chosen not to disclose it to a potential acquirer during active negotiations. That was not a misunderstanding. That was not an oversight. That was fraud exposure. While Natasha's attorney was scrambling to contain that particular fire, the retail partner lit another one. ClearPath Retail, the national chain that had placed Bellaterra products in 400 stores across 12 states and accounted for 31% of the company's annual revenue, received notification from their own legal team that Bellaterra's ownership structure was under dispute. ClearPath's policy on ownership clouds was clear and had been clear since a bad experience with a supplier 5 years earlier. They suspended all pending reorder agreements immediately, pending legal resolution. Bellaterra's fourth quarter revenue projection collapsed overnight. Then the magazine called. The Forbes profile had been in production for 6 weeks. The photographer had already been scheduled. The writer had already submitted a first draft. The editor called Natasha's publicist on a Tuesday morning to say the feature was being placed on hold. The profile would not run as planned. There was a pause on the call. Then the editor said carefully that the piece might be redirected toward another subject connected to the Bellaterra story. Someone whose profile had emerged during the research process. Someone the writer found compelling. Natasha's publicist asked who. The editor said he wasn't at liberty to say just yet. Through all of it, Natasha called Darius. She called him 6 times over 10 days. He answered every time. He listened. He said the right quiet things. That sounded stressful, that he was sure it would get sorted, that she should let her attorney handle it. His voice was exactly what it had always been. Steady, measured, unremarkable. He gave her nothing. Carol Adeyemi met with Darius privately on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room on the 18th floor of Luminos Group's Midtown Atlanta offices. She was direct, as he had known she would be. She said Luminos still wanted Bellaterra. She said the brand had real value. She said what she needed was his signature and his knowledge, and she was prepared to compensate him appropriately for both. She slid a term sheet across the table. VP of Operations, full integration authority, start date, the coming Monday. Darius read every page the way Raymond had taught him to read anything that mattered. Slowly, from the beginning, all the way through. Then he picked up a pen and signed his name at the bottom. Effective Monday. Monday morning, Natasha drove to the office not knowing that her husband had left for the same building 40 minutes earlier. Darius arrived at the Bellaterra offices at 8:15 in the morning. He had never arrived at 8:15 before. In 7 years of marriage he had come to this building as a visitor, as a quiet fixer, as the man Natasha's assistant sometimes had to buzz in because his name was not on the guest list. He had sat in the lobby. He had waited. He had carried things up in the elevator that no one thanked him for carrying. This morning he walked through the front door, and the Luminos integration team was already there, spread across the conference room like they owned the place, because as of Thursday afternoon, they effectively did. Laptops open, binders stacked, 2 junior associates from Carol Adeyemi's team sorting through operational files that Darius himself had built and organized over the previous 4 years. Carol stood near the window, coffee in hand, and gave Darius a single professional nod when he entered. The org charts were already printed and placed at each seat around the conference table. Darius picked one up and looked at it for a moment. His name sat at the top of the operations division. Below it, in the restructured hierarchy, was a box that read Brand Director, Bell Okafor, N. It was not at the top of anything. It reported through his division the same way every other department now did. He set the chart down, took his seat at the head of the table and waited. Natasha arrived at 9. She came through the door with her bag over one shoulder and her phone in her hand, moving at the pace of someone who still believed they were walking into their own company. She was wearing the cream blazer she wore when she wanted to feel in command. Her hair was perfect. Her expression was composed in the particular way it always was when she was performing composure rather than feeling it. She stopped when she saw the room. She read it the way a person reads a sentence they don't want to understand. Slowly, then again, looking for a different meaning that wasn't there. The integration team, the printed binders team, the org charts at every seat. And Darius, sitting at the head of the conference table, his hands folded in front of him, looking at her with the steady, unhurried patience of a man who had been waiting a very long time to be in this exact room. She sat down. She did not choose a seat near him. She chose one closer to the door, which told him everything about how her instincts were reading the situation, even as her mind was still catching up. Darius did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He did not perform a single second of the anger he had every right to feel. He simply began to speak in the same measured register he used for everything that mattered, and he told her the truth. He told her about $47,000 drawn from a credit union account in Decatur, transferred into a business account for a company that did not yet have a name. He told her about the LLC filing he completed himself, the warehouse lease in College Park he had negotiated down $400 a month by reading a clause she had never known existed. He told her about 3 weekends spent building a website she had taken credit for in every interview since. He told her about the vendor calls and the system builds and the logistical disasters he had resolved before she had known they were disasters. He told her about the operating agreement. Page 1. Both signatures. The reinvestment clauses on pages 4 and 5 that she had never read because she had signed it the way she signed everything he put in front of her. Quickly, at the bottom, already thinking about something else. He told her about 3 funding rounds that had required his written consent under that agreement and had never received it. He told her about Luminos and about due diligence and about what a legal team finds when they pull founding documents and look at them carefully, which was something no one in her orbit had thought to do until it was too late. He told her about the Instagram Live event, the easy laugh, the 140,000 people. He said the number slowly, the way you say a number when you want someone to feel its full weight. And then he said the words he had been carrying for a long time, not with cruelty, but with the flat, final precision of a man reading a conclusion from a document he had written himself. You spent 7 years building a brand on my money, my code, and my signature. And when someone asked who I was, you laughed. What you didn't know was that without my name on page 1 of that operating agreement, there is no deal. There has never been a deal without me, and as of this morning, I'm the one you report to. The room was absolutely still. Natasha stared at him. The composure she had walked in with was gone, dissolved completely, replaced by something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the exact space between them. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked at the org chart in front of her, then back at him, and for the first time in 7 years, Darius watched her face do something he had never seen it do before. It collapsed inward, quietly, completely, without theatre. He slid 2 documents across the table with equal and unhurried calm. He explained what each one was. The first was a restructured employment agreement, brand director, reporting to his division, $280,000 reduced to $180,000, effective immediately. The second was a negotiated exit package. He gave her time to read both. She did not read them. She picked up the exit package, looked at it for a long moment, and signed it at the bottom. Darius took the document back, squared it against the table, and slid it to the associate on his left. Then he looked toward Carol Adeyemi and called the next agenda item. Natasha stood up. She gathered nothing because she had brought nothing that belonged to her anymore. She walked to the door, pushed it open, and left the building carrying nothing but her keys. Darius will stay exactly 90 days, long enough to finish what he started, not 1 day longer. Darius stayed exactly 90 days, not 89, not 91, 90 days precisely, because that was what the plan required, and Darius had never been a man who exceeded what the plan required. He arrived each morning before the rest of the integration team. He documented every vendor relationship, every system architecture, every fulfillment workflow he had built over 7 years that existed nowhere in any official Bella Terra record, because no one had ever thought to write down what the quiet man in the background was doing. He transferred that knowledge into structured documentation that any competent operations team could follow without him. He made himself replaceable. That was the point. He left on a Friday afternoon, the same way he left every room, without ceremony, without announcement, without looking back to see if anyone was watching. The equity buyout finalized the same week. $9.1 million transferred to a private account Raymond had helped him establish months earlier. There was no celebration. There was no moment where Darius sat with a glass of something expensive and felt the weight of what he had accumulated. He looked at the confirmation number on the wire transfer for a moment, the way he looked at any completed transaction, and then he closed the laptop and went to make dinner. Grits and catfish, the way Miss Celestine used to make on Fridays when she wanted the week to end on something good. Natasha's story ended the way most stories built on a mission eventually end, not with a single dramatic collapse, but with a slow, grinding series of accountings. The exit package she had taken that Monday morning was structured to last 18 months. It lasted 11. Legal fees consumed the first portion, then the civil settlement that emerged from the material omission finding, which Luminos's attorneys pursued with the same thoroughness they applied to everything. The settlement amount was not public, but the outcome was Natasha Bell Okafor signed a document agreeing to damages and signed away the last of her formal connection to Bella Terra in the same motion. Trish's lawsuit settled privately 3 months after that. The terms were sealed. Neither woman spoke publicly about the other again. The beauty industry is not a large world. When a founder exits under those circumstances with that paperwork trail, the doors that were previously open tend to close with a specific and permanent quality. Natasha made 2 attempts to launch new ventures in the following year. Neither found investors. Her Instagram following, which had once been the most valuable thing she owned, fell by 60,000 in 4 months as the story spread in the particular way that stories spread in professional communities. Quietly, comprehensively, and without mercy. She was, for all practical purposes, out of the industry she had spent 7 years building on a foundation she had chosen not to acknowledge. Darius used the $9.1 million the way his grandmother had taught him to use any resource of significance, carefully, purposefully, and in a way that outlasted the moment it arrived. He established the Okafor Foundation in Miss Celestine's memory. Its structure was simple: no interest loans for black tech entrepreneurs in their first 18 months of operation, the stage where capital was hardest to find, and the ideas were most likely to die for lack of it. The stage where a 29-year-old network engineer had once had to fund someone else's dream from his own savings because the dream had no other architecture. The foundation's first cycle funded 11 entrepreneurs, the second funded 19. Darius reviewed every application himself, the same way he reviewed everything that mattered, slowly, from the beginning, all the way through. He was invited to speak at Morehouse's entrepreneurship program in the spring. He accepted once, drove down to the campus on a Tuesday morning, and spoke for 40 minutes to a room of young men who leaned forward in their chairs the entire time. He declined every subsequent invitation, not out of indifference, but because he understood that his presence was more useful as a resource than as a regular voice, and he did not want to become someone who confused speaking about building with the act of building itself. The Forbes profile ran in the fall. It was a full feature, 2,000 words, a photograph taken in the offices of the Okafor Foundation, a headline that had nothing to do with Bellaterra. His name was spelled correctly. He did not read it. Raymond's son Marcus sent him a link with a single text that said his grandmother would have framed it. Darius sent back a thumbs up and went back to work. He met Kezia Mensah at an HBCU Tech Summit in Nashville on a Saturday afternoon in October, in the kind of encounter that has no drama to it because neither person is performing anything. She was a software architect presenting a session on infrastructure design for early-stage companies. He was in the audience because the topic was relevant to two of his foundation's current borrowers. She asked a question during the session that revealed she understood the material better than half the people presenting it. Afterward, in the corridor, she asked him what he did. Not who he was, not what he had built or sold or been written about. What he did, he said he built things. She asked what kind. He thought about it for a moment, as about the systems and the documents and the foundation and the folder in a fireproof box and the grandmother who had taught him that a man who could account for where his money went could be trusted with where it was going. He thought about all of it, and then he said, "The kind that last." Kezia nodded like that was the right answer. It was. Here is what this story knows and what Darius Okafor Bell knew long before anyone gave him credit for knowing it. Some people confuse silence for absence. They look at the quiet man in the next room and they see someone with nothing to say, when what they are actually seeing is someone with no need to say it yet. They build their confidence on that silence, their whole sense of superiority resting on the assumption that a person who does not announce themselves does not exist. And then one Monday morning, they walk into a room and find that the foundation they have been standing on has a name on it, and it was never theirs. The quietest person in the room is not always the least powerful one. Sometimes they are the only reason the room is still standing. So let me ask you this. If you had been in Darius's position, 7 years of invisible work, 140,000 witnesses to your humiliation, and $9.1 million worth of leverage sitting in a fireproof box, what would you have done? Would you have moved the way he moved, patient and precise? Or would you have shown your hand far sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because I genuinely want to hear from you on this one. And if this story hit the way I think it did, go ahead and drop a like before you leave. It takes 2 seconds and it helps more people find their way to this channel. We have got more stories coming, and I promise you every single one of them is worth staying for. I will see you in the next one.